F. Kennedy Jr. was threatened at an event last Friday that he was at. There was a gentleman who showed up who was posing as a member of RFK Jr.'s security team, and the man was armed. But luckily, RFK Jr.'s actual security team did not recognize this gentleman and said, suspect, and they ended up calling the police, and he's been detained. This is the tweet from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He says, "I'm very grateful that alert and fast-acting protectors from Gavin DeBecker and Associates spotted and detained an armed man who attempted to approach me at my Hispanic Heritage speech at the Wilshire Ebell Theater in Los Angeles tonight. The man wearing two shoulder holsters with loaded pistols and spare ammunition magazines was carrying a U.S. Marshal badge on a lanyard and belt clip federal ID. He identified himself as a member of my security detail. Armed GBDA team members moved quickly to isolate and detain the man until LAPD arrived to make the arrest. I'm also grateful to LAPD for its rapid response." And he says, "I'm still entertaining a hope that President Biden will allow me Secret Service protection. I am the first presidential candidate in history to whom the White House has denied a request for protection." So really scary thing to have happen. A guy show up with a Marshal badge and a bunch of ammunition and loaded pistols and say, "I'm a member of a security team," and posing and trying to get into the event. And luckily, the actual Gavin DeBecker and Associates, which is whom RFK Jr. has hired to actually protect him because he can't get that Secret Service detail. Very, very frightening, very scary thing to have happen. So wanted to go over why he's being denied the detail, like what exactly is the truth there. There's a lot of people who say, well, no, you're not really given secret security detail until 120 days before the election. So 6 months before the election. And we are still over a year away from the November election next year. And so people are saying, no, it's not really quite true. You wouldn't really be entitled to Secret Service. So let's actually go over when you would get Secret Service protection. This is what the clause says. So this is in the code, the actual code. I'm going to go over the actual code, and then we're going to get into this article that actually details some of the other people who were granted Secret Service detail when they requested it, because he mentioned, I'm the only one who hasn't. So we're going to go over who has been. But it says very specifically, major presidential and vice presidential candidates, and within 100 days of the general presidential election, the spouses of such candidates. As used in this paragraph, the term major presidential and vice presidential candidates mean those individuals identified as such by the Secretary of Homeland Security after consultation with an advisory committee consisting of the Speaker of House of Representatives, the Minority Leader of the House of Representatives, the Majority and Minority Leaders of the Senate, and one additional member selected by other members of the committee. The committee shall not be subject to the Federal Advisory Committee Act. So that is who's entitled to Secret Service according to the actual law. And what's interesting about this, and this is where we'll get into this NBC News article, how the government decides when and which presidential candidates get Secret Service, says that the Secret Service protection has been extended to candidates for president and not just presidents themselves, since a law was enacted in 1968. Get this, following the assassination of Kennedy's father during his presidential campaign. So they enacted this law saying that presidential candidates can get Secret Service detail once after Kennedy's father was killed. That's when this was enacted. And then here he is saying, hey, I need some Secret Service, that you guys enacted after my dad was killed. And they're like ignoring him completely. They're just not giving him any of this Secret Service detail. So the article cites that certain people have been granted Secret Service detail. Donald Trump was given Secret Service protection almost 1 year prior to the 2016 general election after being approved for it in 2015. You know who else was also approved for that? That would be GOP contender Ben Carson. So Ben Carson was given Secret Service detail leading up to the Iowa caucuses, and Donald Trump was given Secret Service detail. Interesting. Now, Donald Trump, I think it was pretty obvious he was a major candidate. There's no doubt about that. And if you paid attention to the code, it said major presidential candidates and major vice presidential candidates. So who gets to decide who's a major candidate? The Department of Homeland Security. And that would be Biden's Alejandro Mayorkas is the person who's in charge of the Department of Homeland Security. And he is the one who would decide whether or not RFK Jr. is a major presidential candidate. Now, since the Democratic Party is completely ignoring RFK Jr., and since they are avoiding debates, they're not allowing him, they're afraid of the early primaries, and so they're shifting and they're wanting South Carolina to be the first primary for the Democratic Party because that's the one they know Joe Biden will win, and they don't want to give Kennedy any sort of running start against Biden in New Hampshire, Iowa, or Nevada, and so they're pushing them aside and going with South Carolina first. So they're doing all of these things in order to delegitimize RFK Jr., in order to ignore him, in order to just not legitimize his campaign at all. So if they were to give him Secret Service detail, they would be legitimizing his candidacy, and they don't want to do that. Because in their mind, Joe Biden's the guy. There's no discussion about it. Anybody else is just kidding themselves. Clown show. Shouldn't be there. That's what they're thinking in their mind. So they're thinking you, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., are not a major presidential candidate, and therefore you are not getting any sort of Secret Service detail. Now, the argument, however, is they could continue to think he's not a major candidate. Fine. You want to ignore him. You want to think that he's just like, wasting his time. Biden's obviously the guy. Fine. But then how do you explain GOP contender Ben Carson? Because he wasn't a major Republican presidential candidate, but they looked at Ben Carson and like they did with Obama, they were like, oh, well, you're a black contender for president, and so people might want to kill you, so we're going to give you Secret Service detail. That's literally what they thought. In fact, with Barack Obama, they gave him Secret Service protection May of 2007, which was an unusually early step, but because he was the first major black candidate, they decided, and I don't even know, was he the first major black candidate? Because that is a little odd, right? Or had there been previous ones, but they just knew he was going to win, right? They were like, oh, but we know, because we know in advance everybody was going to win. But they gave him Secret Service detail May of 2007. So May, one entire year, a year and a half prior to the election. We're in September, a year before the election. So Obama got Secret Service protection well before Kennedy at this stage in the election. So Kennedy should still, so this isn't like he's asking for Secret Service detail way before everybody else. He's asking for it, and Obama even got it way before he still hasn't even received it. And it's because they were like, well, but he was black, and so we had to give him that because we were afraid somebody's going to kill him. Well, he's a Kennedy, and I don't know, there's like a precedent of Kennedys kind of getting killed, He's got an actual precedent here of, hey, I might be in danger just by sheer being a Kennedy. I don't know. It's happened in call me paranoid, right? But I don't know. And yet they're still not giving him Secret Service details. So that is the truth around it, is that the Biden administration just doesn't want to legitimize this campaign. They don't want to consider him a major presidential candidate, even though he absolutely is. Just by having his last name and getting the numbers he's getting in the polls, he is a major presidential candidate. They just don't want to acknowledge that. So that is... that's what's going on there, and we will keep you posted on if he ever gets that Secret Service detail, if the Biden administration actually ever does acknowledge his candidacy. And, would love to just also see them debate, would love to see an actual primary process, the whole democracy thing. I don't know. But pie in the sky thinking here and for the DNC, apparently. All right, guys, let me tell you about cbdistillery.com. I am somebody who doesn't sleep well. I have an 11-year-old shepherd. She's getting older and she's got a lot of aches and pains. She's kind of walking funny, which is why I looked into cbdistillery.com for a natural way to help me get some sleep and give my furry family member Scarlett the relief that she needs. CB Distillery has over 2 million satisfied customers. 90% of customers report they sleep better with CBD. 81% said CBD helps them with stress. 80% said CBD helps with aches and pains after physical activity. So if you struggle to get a good night's sleep, or if you're dealing with too much stress and you can use a little calm in your life, if you suffer with pain and discomfort, especially after physical exercise, then try CBD from the source that I trust. That is cbdistillery.com. You're going to get 20% off your order when you enter my name, Kim, at checkout. No prescription required. That's cbdistillery.com, promo code Kim for 20% off.
The question I would have is, I lived in